long ball is going to go for a touchdown. The game's over. Webster Slaughter.
Metcalf will go for the score. Unbelievable.
45-40. Run, William, run. He's got blockers in front. 5. Touchdown. Joshua Cribbs turns disaster into a score.
Sight wants it all on this one for Logan, and he is there.
Jim Brown to the 30. Jim Brown is going to go in for another touchdown.
The Cleveland Browns select Baker Mayfield.
Wow. It is Baker Mayfield.
Hello, Cleveland. Welcome to another episode of the 1085 podcast. It is episode 85. I am your host, Anthony Joki. And as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jack McCurry of the North Coast Sports. How you doing tonight, Jack?
I'm doing well, man. You know, despite a Browns loss today, I'm doing really well. How are you?
Doing all right. You know, day off from work. Watched a lot of football today so far. Watched a lot of football yesterday, too. I always enjoy coming home late from work on Saturday night and staying up for like 2, 3 watching whatever West Coast game is on. But we're here to talk Browns, and I think we're in somewhat of an okay mood. I think, after the firing of Hugh Jackson last week, the mood around the franchise and the fan base has changed a little bit. We didn't expect to beat the Chiefs this week, but I think all in all, the effort that they put out today was a lot better than what we expected.
Yeah, definitely. I think, like you said, coming into today, I don't think anybody really expected us to, beat the Chiefs. I think a lot of us expected it to be competitive, and I think it was to a degree. I just think when you look at the Kansas City Chiefs as a whole, they're are no doubt the best team in the AFC. Some would argue that. Obviously, Patriot fans would definitely argue that. But, they are heading in the right direction. I think the Browns are as well. It's just going to take some more time. But all in all, today was about as expected.
I was very surprised when we went into halftime with the score 21-15. And let's talk about that first half here, because the Kansas City Chiefs scored on offense all 3 times that they had the ball in the first half. They scored touchdowns. There was just no stopping Patrick Mahomes. What makes that offense so dominant? Because they have, playmakers everywhere. They have Kareem Hunt in the backfield. They have Tyreek Hill. Obviously, they have Pat Mahomes. Their offensive line is pretty good. And obviously, when you have a head coach like Andy Reid calling plays, it's just what seems to be a perfect storm in terms for that offense.
Yeah, I mean, you have everything in that offense. You obviously have the young gunslinging quarterback in Mahomes. You have Kareem Hunt and even Spencer Ware, who are capable NFL running backs, but also can beat you as receivers. And then you look at all the weapons they have on the outside: Tyreek Hill, Sammy Watkins, even though he was a little banged up today. Obviously, Travis Kelce. I mean, there's the variety all over that Chiefs offense just makes it really tough to beat. And, even I think Trent Green said it today on the broadcast. He goes, I haven't seen an offense like this since the Rams of the early 2000s, the greatest show on turf. And that's high praise for such a young offense like the Chiefs, but they're backing it up every Sunday. They're averaging almost 36 points a game, and obviously they put up 37 on us today.
Let's talk about the defense a little bit, because obviously, they had their work cut out for them today against the Chiefs, giving up, I want to say, close to 500 yards of total offense. I know Mahomes had 300 yards passing before the end, or just at the start of the third quarter today. So, this defense, obviously, the injuries are starting to pile up. You saw Denzel Ward leave the game early. Joe Schobert was out. Randall was out before the game even started. He was a scratch. During the game, you saw, was it Carey go down, or was it Gaines?
It was Gaines. Another concussion for him.
Gaines went down. Kirksey went down with a knee injury. So obviously this defense was banged up. And for all intents and purposes, I think the defense played as well as they were going to with all the injuries that they've have started to accumulate.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, like you said, we lost all those starters. Terrence Mitchell's still out. He won't be back for a few more weeks. He just got the cast off early last week, so that's a good sign for him. But like you see, the injuries piled up, and you could have thought that the Chiefs probably would have put 50 up, and they probably would have, but they let off in the fourth quarter for the most part. But the defense played as good as they could. Garrett and Avery both got in there, got a sack. We did get another turnover on a desperation throw at the end of the first half. Denzel Rice recorded his first pick, but the defense played as well as expected. There's obviously some things that you wish they could do better, and obviously one player that I know could do a lot better, and that's Jamie Collins, but that's a story for another time. But yeah, I mean, the defense did as good as they could. I mean, like I said, the Chiefs gave up 36 a game. The Browns gave up 37, so I guess it was a good day for them.
Was there any player on defense today that kind of caught your eye, kind of impressed you of the, obviously there were a lot of injuries. So was there anyone on that defense that kind of caught your eye today?
Tanner Vallejo, definitely, stepping in when Kirksey went down with the hamstring injury, him to go in there, and he was putting some licks on some of the Chiefs guys. So I thought he played well, and obviously Rice getting a pick, staying in bounds. It was right on the edge. It was like right on the tightrope. But other than that, everybody else was about as good as advertised. The defense made some pressure, but obviously Mahomes is able to move around, and he was obviously able to get the ball out quickly too. So I thought the pass rush showed up, but they just weren't able to get there in time just because Mahomes is smart enough to know to get the ball out quickly.
This was the first game that obviously Greg Williams is the interim head coach. What did you think of how he was able to call the defense and be the head coach at the same time this week?
I thought he did as well as he could. Obviously, when you're juggling two roles like that, you're going to have a lot to cover during a game. Like I said, the defense, they played as well as they could. This Chiefs offense is one of the best. It's on pace to be one of the best in NFL history. It's obviously the best in the NFL, I think, this season. So, Greg Williams could do what he could. Obviously he's going to blitz and everything, and Andy Reid, Eric Bieniemy, and the Chiefs offense obviously picked that up, running screen passes, getting the ball out quickly. So all in all, for the first game, I thought Greg did an okay job. Obviously, a loss is a loss and it sucks, but it's going to be a process. Obviously, you got to get everything lined up. It was obviously the first game. He was the head coach as well as being the defensive coordinator. So it was as well as expected.
When you look at Pat Mahomes, who they face this week, I would tend to think he's kind of the front runner for the MVP. I mean, when you look at his current stats, has over 2,500 yards, 2,500 passing yards. His completion percentage is at 66%. He has 26 touchdowns, only 6 interceptions. And to look at the projected stats, if he keeps on to the same pace, he's on pace for over 5,000 yards and over 50 touchdowns. Would you say this was expected of Pat Mahomes, and do you think that he is a front runner right now for MVP of the league?
I do think he's the front runner for the MVP. I think if he doesn't win it, it'll be a shocker. I thought he was talented coming out of Texas Tech, and I thought, him getting picked by Kansas City, they moved up 17 spots to get him. I thought it was the perfect spot for him because he was able to sit a year behind Alex Smith. But I tip my hat to Andy Reid and Eric Bieniemy, the offensive coordinator there. They have done a great job of going back and incorporating a lot of stuff that Mahomes ran at Texas Tech into the Chiefs offense. And I was listening to something early last week that, they started incorporating it last year under Alex Smith. And Alex Smith, came from Utah and under Urban Meyer's system. So a lot of the spread offense stuff Alex Smith was obviously familiar with. And then Mahomes was able to sit back and soak it all in like a sponge last year. And then he's been able to step on the field. Granted, he's got a lot of talent around him, but Mahomes is a talented quarterback. So it doesn't surprise me that he's been successful. It just surprises me that he's on such an historic pace where he's going to going to go for 5,000 yards and over 50 touchdowns and what I would consider his rookie season.
Obviously the Chiefs moved up one pick in front of the Browns last year, and I think we've talked about this before, but do you believe that the Browns would have taken him with that 12th pick last year if he was still there and the Chiefs didn't move in front of him?
Yeah, but as our buddy on Twitter, Benjamin Albright, has said that if he wouldn't have taken him, if the Chiefs wouldn't have moved up to taking him, the Saints were going to take him at 11. So, but I do think if he was going to be there on the clock at 12, that the Browns were going to take him.
All right, let's look at the other side of football and talk about how the Browns played offensively today. I think when you play a team like the Chiefs that are going to score pretty much at will, your offense has to be clicking. And today, early on, the offense played pretty well. What did you think of how Baker performed today? He went for 29 of 42, 297 yards, 2 touchdowns, and an interception late in the fourth quarter there. But what did you think of how Baker was kind of able to, compete and try to keep up with Pat Mahomes?
I thought Baker played well. Obviously, the interception was his only mistake. He can't throw the ball across his body like that. It doesn't end well most of the time. But all in all, I thought he was great. I mean, he threw the ball around. I think he hit 8 different receivers. I thought Kitchens designed a great game plan and a great scheme to, get the ball out quickly for Baker. They moved him out of the pocket a lot, which is great because obviously the last couple of weeks Baker was taking an absolute beating. He did get sacked a couple times and he did take one shot to the head and he had to leave the game for it. But, I thought Baker performed well and I thought the offense performed well as a whole.
It was very clear of Freddie Kitchens' game plan was to get Duke Johnson more involved. He had only 1 carry for 8 yards, but in the passing game, he had 9 targets, and he caught all those targets and ended up with 70 yards and 2 touchdowns. Obviously, this has been our biggest point of contention with Hugh Jackson and Todd Haley before they got fired was the lack of use of Duke Johnson. Do you finally feel that they took a step in the right direction today of finally getting one of their biggest playmakers, if not their biggest playmaker, involved?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, obviously Kitchens was the running back coach before he got the promotion to offensive coordinator. And I think he knew that, hey, I had these guys back here, Chubb and Johnson. They need to get the ball because they're going to make plays when they get the opportunity. And obviously I think he made it clear today to put Duke, incorporate him into the offense big time. And it showed, all the wheel routes and all the check downs, to Duke Johnson, it paid off, and he was dynamic today. And I think that's what we all wanted, was for Duke Johnson to get the ball in his hands. And I just have to wonder, and I tweeted this out during the game, what was Todd Haley and Hugh Jackson thinking? Because I'm sure they were watching this game just to see how Kitchens and Williams were going to do with this team. And I'd like to know what they're thinking right now.
What did you think of Brashad Perriman today? Because Kitchens used him in a few different formations. He used him on 2 reverses, I think it was, and he had 2 catches as well. Is Perriman somebody you think that it would be a nice surprise if they could kind of rely on him a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. They ran those reverses on back-to-back plays, utilizing Perriman's 4.2 speed, and then they were able to incorporate him in the pass game. And Baker talked about this post-game. He goes, Kitchens, sat down with us and was taking our ideas and what we wanted. And, he said that was nice to have the coordinator ask us what we liked and what we wanted. And obviously there has to be some kind of connection there with Baker and Perriman from practice or something. We all know Perriman has the talent. He just had a problem holding on to the football, but he made some nice plays today. And it was nice to see a lot of guys get involved in the offense. Like I said, 8 different receivers. It was Njoku had another good game. Callaway, Landry, obviously getting Higgins back into the mix. They still were using Ratley, and I think even at a point they had Hilliard out there on the field. So, there is talent on this offensive side of the football. So, it'll be interesting to see down the stretch how Kitchens utilizes it all.
I think one thing that really caught my eye today is I maybe counted only 1 drop, maybe 2. And, that's obviously been one of the biggest problems with this offense have been the drop so far this season. If they could really start to limit those and put those in the past, this offense is going to be that much better because there have been countless footballs that have been dropped this year that could have been big plays, if not touchdowns. And if that's something that they could put behind them, it'd be absolutely wonderful. I think what might get lost in this game a little bit is Nick Chubb. He had 22 carries for 85 yards and a touchdown. I thought for the most part he played pretty well. They had a shake-up on the offensive line today. Greg Robinson started instead of Desmond Harrison at left tackle. And I think there's a noticeable difference, especially in the running game.
Yeah, I think, the offensive line I thought performed well. Baker only got sacked twice. The only miscue I saw was when Njoku completely missed on a block on one of those sacks. And then you could see him and Robinson were kind of like looking at each other. And, obviously, with Harrison going down, obviously that you got to rebuild the chemistry when you insert a new guy into the lineup. But for the most part, I thought Robinson slid in and played well. Obviously, he was the number 2 pick in the draft and played left tackle with the Rams, so he's familiar with that spot. It'll be interesting to see what they're going to do going forward with that, if they're going to put Harrison back in or if they're going to keep Robinson or what they're going to do there. But, you could see holes were getting open today, and Chubb, attacked that. One of my favorite plays is he cut inside. Reggie Ragland, the Chiefs linebacker, grabbed his jersey, and Chubb just kept going and dragged him for like 6 yards. So, while we all talk about Chubb's explosiveness, he's also one tough guy, and he's strong, and he's able to drag defenders along with him if he needs to.
Yeah, and Chubb played very well, and obviously, after the trade of Carlos Hyde, it was their focus to have him be the feature back. And I thought today there was a nice balance of getting him the football in terms of rushes and getting Duke, the ball in terms of passing. And when you have two really good running backs, especially one who's really good and one who's really good at running, and the other that's good with receiving. Having that kind of equal balance for the most part is nice, and it kind of opens up the playbook even more. And you saw just things looked a lot more smooth this week in terms of the offense and the way that they were moving the football. The only downside for me with the offensive line today was Chris Hubbard. This has been I want to say not going on the whole season, but more so in the last 3-4 weeks of. His play has not been good at all. I want to say he gave up both sacks today, if I remember correctly. I know he gave up one for sure. Although I think he gave up the play that Baker was stripped on, but it was called back due to penalty. But what do you think of Hubbard's performance today? And the Browns can get out of his contract after this season, and do you think they're going to move on from that deal?
Yeah, Hubbard's been up and down. There's times where I thought he was probably the worst offensive lineman, but then Pro Football says he was the best. He has regressed, but, I'll give it some time. I think it might be more on coaching, if anything. From what I've heard, Bob Wiley's not really getting the most out of these offensive linemen, so I'm looking forward to the change there. I know everybody loves Bob Wiley from Hard Knocks, but if he's not coaching these guys up, it's not he's defeating the purpose of him being here and being the offensive line coach. But the one thing that I liked that I heard was with the offensive line, I think Robert Klemko was on with Bull and Fox, and I think he said this. He said that instead of doing these like one-on-one position drills, he said the offensive line was going out there 5-on-5, and that's how they were trying to get better as a unit. So that's always good that these guys are rallying together as a team. I know today, as a whole team, they came out for intros instead of doing like by position groups or like individual player introductions. They all came out as a team. So, it's good that the team is coming together during these last 7-8 games and rallying together and trying to salvage a season that a lot of people are already focusing on the draft or on the coaching search. So, but with the offensive line, we'll see how it goes. The way it's going right now, I'm sure Dorsey might try to get out of Hubbard's contract, but, I don't think he wants to own that mistake yet. And that's probably been Dorsey's only major mistake so far as GM.
Yeah, and when you look at, I've done a little work on the free agent class coming to be. There's really nobody at left tackle. There's really nobody at right tackle that I really have an interest in so far in terms of maybe replacing both the left tackle and right tackle. So we might be stuck with him for a couple years until we're able to find somebody else. Because I don't think they're gonna take 2 tackles in the draft, but it's a little early for that. Even though we're going to get into it here probably in the bye week, we're going to start talking draft a little bit based on now the records starting to slip away from the Browns for sure. Let's continue to talk about offensive linemen, but we're going to talk about one from the Kansas City Chiefs. He was a former Cleveland Brown and Cam Irving, and he had an interesting quote after the game today. But before that, you saw after the one touchdown that Kareem Hunt scored, somebody in the stands threw something at him, and he chucked it back at him and continued dancing back to the sideline. After the game, he said that he wanted to go out and show everybody in the Browns front office that he could play football, and darn you if you think that I can't do that. So obviously the front office that's here now is not the front office that traded him. That was Sashi Brown. They traded him before the season in 2017. What did you think of how Cam played? And obviously, they have more than one former Browns offensive lineman on their offensive line, and Mitchell Schwartz as well.
Yeah, and not just Mitchell Schwartz, but Austin Ryder's there, and then Wiley, who was on their offensive line, I guess was on our practice squad, and we ended up cutting him. Going back to the game, besides the throwing the thing into the stands, I think after Travis Kelce's touchdown, they were dancing, and Cam Irving gave the fans he did the D-Generation X crotch chop. And I thought, Cam, you don't have to be that low. Obviously, we see what Isaiah Crowell did back at the beginning of the season with the Jets game, and he wiped his butt to the fans. The fans weren't hard on Crowell, but they were hard on Cam, and every right to be. He was a bust here, and he just didn't work out, and that's why the Browns traded him to Kansas City. He's not doing that much better there. It just doesn't show up because the Chiefs are winning. I looked it up before the show. Cam's rated the 67th, going into today, was rated the 67th guard in football, according to Pro Football Focus. And me and Anthony both laughed because there's only 64 starting guards in the National Football League. So that just shows you how bad Cam Irving is. With the quote, like you said, Anthony, he's taking shots at the Browns front office that's not even here anymore. Sashi Brown's gone. Andrew Berry's still here. Paul D. Podesta's here, but I don't think they played any part in the trade of Cam Irving to Kansas City. He has no reason to be mad at this current Browns front office. Mitchell Schwartz shouldn't be mad at this current Browns front office. I mean, they're mad at guys that aren't even here anymore. So I don't know why they have to continue to beat a dead horse when it's not even here anymore.
Yeah, I guess that's maybe a blessing of the Browns turning over the front office so much. When guys come back and play here, the front office isn't even here that fired them or traded them or whatever. So, it sucked to see Schwartz go. It sucked to see Alex Mack go. But, the Browns were completely heading in a different direction, and that direction didn't include those guys. And but for the thing that bothers me about Schwartz is that they didn't even offer him a contract. And when you have a higher tier free agent, hit free agency, just at least offer him something, even if it's not your intent to sign him. Just show, kind of show some respect to your guys that you drafted and whatnot. And for him to not even get a contract offer from the Browns was, terrible on Sashi's part. But obviously, they were looking to save money. They were looking to move in a different direction and whatnot. And Schwartz wasn't in their plans. So, I guess it's all water under the bridge for now. And, hopefully with John Dorsey and whatnot, things will be different when they have their own free agents to take care of. Go ahead.
With Schwartz, the Browns offered him a contract. It was below what Schwartz thought he could get on the open market, and then they went out and went on the open market. And this was before obviously free agency started. The agent went out there and he wasn't getting what he thought. So they went back to the Browns and said, we'll take your original offer, but Sashi and them had already pulled it. So that's why Mitchell Schwartz, I think, is still kind of angry. But he said post-game today, he goes, it's all worked out. And, kudos to him. He's probably the best right tackle in the league. I think he's been an all-pro a couple times since he joined there, and he's on a winning team. So, I'm not mad at Mitchell Schwartz. He had to do what was right because obviously the Browns didn't do right by him in the end.
And it's not like the contract he got from Kansas City was a terrible one either. He got at least what I think, he got a pretty nice deal from them. And obviously, it's all about winning, and they have a pretty good football team there that's competing for the playoffs and Super Bowl right now. So let's move on here. And, obviously the Browns did change head coaches last week. And, we talked about potential replacements a little bit, but rumors are starting to come to the surface a little bit if you wanted to start to discuss those.
Yeah, on NFL Game Day morning, this morning on NFL Network, Ian Rappaport mentioned 4 names for Browns coaching candidates, and he also mentioned that he believes that John Dorsey's going to run the search, and they won't be using a search firm like they have in previous coaching vacancies. The 4 candidates are Lincoln Riley, the Oklahoma head coach, John DeFilippo, the Vikings offensive coordinator. A surprise one to me, Josh McDaniels, the Patriots offensive coordinator, and Rappaport said that McDaniels will consider coaching opportunities again, which I'm kind of iffy on. And then he mentioned a name that's not even available at the moment, Packers head coach Mike McCarthy, because of the connection there with Dorsey, along with Elliott Wolf and Alonzo Highsmith. They said if McCarthy were to become available, which the way the Packers are going right now, he definitely probably will be available. They said that McCarthy could draw interest from Cleveland.
Yeah, we talked about it a little bit last week. There was an NFL Network reporter that said not long after Hugh Jackson was fired to keep an eye on that situation because, if things go south up there in Green Bay, this season for the Packers, he could be out of there. And, that situation of McCarthy joining guys he's already familiar with, like you said, with Dorsey, Wolf, and Highsmith, that'd be a very interesting proposal. And we've seen what McCarthy's been able to do in Green Bay over the years, with Aaron Rodgers and crew. So, I would be all for Mike McCarthy. Now, the name on there that really, throws me is Josh McDaniels. Just like you, I'm pretty iffy on that, especially with what happened last year with him and the Indianapolis Colts. He took the job, and then he backed out of it, and ultimately they ended up getting Frank Reich, which I think is working out really well for the Colts organization right now. There's just a thing with former Patriots coordinators that just rubs me the wrong way. Obviously, we've had 2 here with Romeo Crennel and Eric Mangini. You've seen others across the league, including Josh McDaniels' first stint with the Broncos. So, it's just that will always be wary to me. I'll always be cautious with those guys. And if you're going to hire McDaniels, he wanted control when he was in Denver. I think he had some control. And obviously, I don't think he would have that here with John Dorsey being in charge. So I'm curious how that relationship would work.
Yeah, going back to McCarthy, I don't – the whole thing with retread head coaches just kind of leave me iffy. I know we're going to talk about another one in a moment, but, with McCarthy, it just seems like he has wasted the best years of Aaron Rodgers' career. Now, granted, Aaron Rodgers has been hurt, and it's not all on McCarthy, obviously. Ted Thompson and the current GM have not put the best talent around Rodgers either to keep him healthy or to provide him with quality running game or wide receivers. But, just having McCarthy here, I don't know if I'm that confident in, him coming here and would he be the right guy for Baker Mayfield. And with McDaniels, like the whole thing with Indy really is a sore spot with me. I feel like if you're going to do that and you betrayed I'm sure a lot of assistant coaches are kind of like, can we trust McDaniels if he does this again? Because I think they locked in a defensive coordinator and maybe even an offensive coordinator, and then those guys have to work under Frank Reich this year when they weren't his picks. So, is McDaniels going to be able to bring in a quality staff? I do think McDaniels is a great offensive mind. And when he went to Denver, he got complete control. He thought he could be Bill Belichick, and he obviously couldn't be, and it didn't. It only lasted a year and a half. Obviously, coming here, he won't be Bill Belichick because John Dorsey's running the football operations, and all McDaniels has to do is coach. I would be open to it, I guess, but McDaniels definitely wouldn't be my first choice.
Obviously, we've talked about the other two a little bit, and Lincoln Riley and John DeFilippo. Is there one of those two that you prefer over the other, or is it yet to be determined for you?
If I had to pick over those two, I'd go with DeFilippo, just because he has the NFL experience. Just because he has the experience here in Cleveland, he knows what he's getting into. And I love what he did here, his 1 year here, especially with the quarterback position, with McCown and even Manziel to a degree. And I think the other quarterback was Austin Davis, and he didn't look that bad under DeFilippo's play calling. And then obviously he went back to Philly and did some great work with Carson Wentz and Nick Foles. And now he's in Minnesota working with Kirk Cousins and the Vikings offense. So I would feel more comfortable right now with DeFilippo, although I want to do some more work on Lincoln Riley before I give a final opinion on him.
All right, let's talk about another interesting name. And, there have been rumors starting to fly over in Baltimore about a possible head coaching change. I know they're changing front offices. This is Ozzie Newsome's last year as a general manager of that team. And when you bring in a new guy, he might want to bring in his own head coach. What would you think if the Ravens were to fire John Harbaugh about him potentially coming in and being the Browns' new head coach?
Yeah, I would definitely be open to this one. I don't think it's all John Harbaugh's fault why the Baltimore Ravens haven't been back to the Super Bowl in 6 seasons, and they've only made the playoffs one time in those 6 seasons since. I think a lot of it had to do with the talent selection by Ozzie Newsome. But I can understand if they want to make a change. Harbaugh's been there for 10 years. He's done a lot for that organization. They've been to 3 AFC championship games. They've won the Super Bowl, obviously. But, it's obvious the coaching hasn't been the greatest either. He might want a fresh start. Baltimore might want a fresh start. If he were to become available, I definitely think he should be on the list of candidates. I seen Benjamin Albright said if he became available, the Broncos would definitely be interested as well. So I do think if Harbaugh did get fired by Baltimore, which looks like it's going to happen at some point unless they have a miraculous turnaround towards the end of the season, Harbaugh's going to be available, and I think any team that would have a head coaching opening would definitely put Harbaugh on the list.
When you look at Harbaugh, obviously, I would say he's more of a defensive head coach, and when you have a potential franchise quarterback, and we think we all do, in Baker Mayfield, obviously he would have to bring in a very good offensive coordinator. Is there anybody that you can think of that's been with Harbaugh in the past that could come in and be the offensive coordinator to help guide Mayfield and help him grow into the franchise quarterback we think he can be?
Nobody that I can think of off the top of my head. He's connected to Gary Kubiak, but Kubiak seems to be tied into Denver. Another offensive name that was under him was Jim Caldwell. I liked what Caldwell did at Indy and in Detroit, but obviously there's a reason why he's available. And the only other assistant with offensive ties that was under Harbaugh that had success, and I use quotation marks, was, don't hit me for saying this, Hugh Jackson back in Oakland, and in Cincinnati he had success offensively. Obviously it wasn't here, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but other than that, the other names I can think of, Marty Morningweg, Cam Cameron. See, that's the only reservation I would have with Harbaugh, is that he doesn't have a successful track record with offensive coaches, And I think if he were to come in, he's got to bring somebody in that is an offensive guru, because obviously we want to develop Baker Mayfield into one of the top quarterbacks in the league. It's not going to happen if you bring in a guy like a Cam Cameron or a Marty Morningwig.
Now, one guy on there that interests me is Mark Trestman. He was just fired from the CFL as being a head coach over there, and he was an offensive coordinator under John Harbaugh. So that would be one name that I would be very interested in if Harbaugh were to be the new head coach of the Browns.
Trestman, I don't know. He didn't work out in Chicago as the head coach. I remember he was a candidate for the Browns job at the time. He was the offensive coordinator for the Browns back in the late 80s when Bernie was here. I don't remember him having all that much success when he was the Baltimore offensive coordinator. So I would like to go in a different direction. I mean, I like Harbaugh, but he's going to have to impress me with big time with an offensive play caller.
Yeah, and obviously when you're looking at Baker Mayfield, it's all about him, and unless they don't find an offensive coach, if it were to be Harbaugh, they have to find somebody to come in and help guide this kid into playing as well as we think he can. All right, I think this might be the last time we talk Hugh Jackson. I know we said it on the last episode, but I think this might be the last time. And after he was fired last Monday, he did a sit-down interview with Mary Kay for Cleveland.com, and he also went on ESPN's First Take. And I just want to get your reaction to a few different quotes that he had in both the article and on his First Take appearance. So here's the first one for you. He said, "People for some reason thought I couldn't run an offense and that I needed to hire an offensive coordinator, but I was never able to actually run my offense the first 2 years because we didn't have the players." Your reaction to that one?
To quote Ken Carman, so it was Sashi Brown's fault that he ran a flea flicker out of the back of the end zone, of his own end zone. That right there just shows me that Hugh Jackson doesn't hold himself accountable. It was not. Part of it was Sashi Brown's fault, but need I remind Hugh Jackson that he wanted RG3. He didn't want Carson Wentz, which is obviously going to the next quote. He wanted Jared Goff. He didn't get it, so the Browns made the trade down, although some would argue that Sashi was going to trade down no matter what. He advocated for all these guys, stood up on the podium and advocated for all of them. Trust me, with Cody Kessler. The quote about Kaiser about if I'm worth as much salt as I am as a head coach, I'll get the best out of Sean Kaiser or something like that. He advocated for all these guys, and the offense sucked. And so I think that's why you went out and got Todd Haley, and clearly it didn't work, so you're going to blame everybody else except yourself. I mean, it's typical Hugh Jackson.
And what cracks me up about this is a day after this quote, you saw in a Thursday Night Football game with the San Francisco 49ers, some guy, what the heck is his name? I already forgot his name.
Nick Mullins
came in, a quarterback out of Southern Mississippi, who I think had a losing record at Southern Mississippi. And he came in and he won a game with Kyle Shanahan. And, look what Shanahan was able to do with Nick Mullins. He was able to win. And Hugh Jackson won one game in 2 years with all the different quarterbacks that he had. So when I hear the excuse of we didn't have the players to win, yeah, that's part of it. But if Hugh Jackson was a better head coach than he was, they probably would have won about 6-7 games over the last couple of years. And that's maybe giving him too much credit. So, look, you got to do a better job as a head coach. All right, you mentioned the Carson Wentz quote, and here it is. He was asked if he liked Carson Wentz last year in the first draft that he was a part of. He said, "Oh my gosh, yes. Did I like Carson Wentz? Hell yes. But the plan was to never take a quarterback that year. It was all about trading back to get picks. If you're doing that, you've got to pick the right players." Your reaction to that quote?
Well, and a lot of people found the old tweet from Mike Silver, who I'm sure has blocked every Cleveland fan imaginable since last Monday. He said that Hugh Jackson liked Carson Wentz, but didn't think he was worthy of the second pick. Now, revisionist history, 2.5 years later, he likes him. He likes Pat Mahomes. He likes Deshaun Watson. Well, I mean, Hugh Jackson needs to quit living in revisionist history land and just own up and say, yeah, I liked him, but I didn't like him where we drafted him at, or we didn't have the opportunity to draft him. Yeah, I'm sure Dwight Clark, God rest his soul, and Carmen Policy would probably come out and say, no, yeah, we liked Tom Brady back in 2000, but, so-and-so wanted to take Spurgeon Wynn. The revisionist history doesn't work. If you wanted them, you should have pounded the table more to get those guys if you really wanted them.
Yeah, we really like Donovan McNabb, but we decided, to take Tim Couch instead. It's, you can say that just about with any player, in draft history, over the course of the years. I did mention he did appear on First Take, and there was one more interesting quote about the reason why he got fired, and he said, I think when you stop and look at it, it's truly really about Baker Mayfield. I think they want to do everything they can to put him in the situation. I mean, you got the first pick in the draft, who I think is going to be a franchise quarterback, who's going to be a sensational player, and he's not playing well. When you look at the firing of Hugh Jackson, and we talked about it a little bit last week, do you think that this is all about Baker Mayfield and the attempt to get him the right coach for him to be the franchise quarterback that we've been looking for since 1999?
I think the majority of it has to do with Baker Mayfield, because you don't want to try to develop him in an internal discord, like they've said, between Haley and Hugh. I also think that, not just Baker Mayfield, but you got to look at the rest of the roster. The youngest roster in the National Football League. And if you have infighting going on, it's not only hampering Baker's development, it's hampering Myles Garrett's development. David Njoku, Jabril Peppers, Nick Chubb, Austin Corbett, the list goes on and on of all the young talent we have. And, you have the infighting and the toxic environment. It's not good for any of their development. Obviously, Baker is probably the most important one because he's the potential franchise quarterback, and, he's got the biggest weight of that team. It goes through him. So obviously it had a lot to do with that, and that's obviously why they made the change.
All right. I have one more question for you about Hugh Jackson, and hopefully this is the last one on the show that we'll talk about. Do you think Hugh Jackson will get either another head coaching job or offensive coordinator job in the NFL in his career?
I would say yes, because I do think that Mike Brown down in Cincinnati seems to have affection for Hugh Jackson, and I think he'll get another opportunity somewhere, whether it's an offensive coordinator. Maybe he is the head coach in waiting for the Bengals once Marvin Lewis steps aside. I don't think he should be. I think, how he treated his players at Oakland at the end, and how he treated people here in Cleveland, and how he's acting like none of it was his fault. It's ridiculous, and I don't think anybody should be able to have another opportunity to coach. But you look at all the guys that have been fired by the Browns since 99. Every single one of them got an opportunity to be a coach again, whether it was a coordinator or a head coach. You look, Pat Shurmur, I think when he got fired in 2012, nobody thought he would be a head coach again, and here he is, the coach of the New York Football Giants. Mike Pettine's the defensive coordinator at Green Bay. Crennel's the defensive coordinator down in Houston. Chris Palmer got opportunities again. Butch Davis obviously went back to college. And Chudzinski was coordinator in Indy for a while. So everybody gets an opportunity again. I'm sure Hugh will, but I don't think he deserves to.
The reason I asked NFL is, do you think he could potentially be a head coach in waiting over at USC?
That's possible. There was the rumors last year about him going potentially to Arizona State before Herm Edwards took the job. So there's always the chance. Obviously Hugh Jackson's from California. He's got the ties there. Coached at Cal, was a graduate and a former staff member at Pacific. So who knows? I think he also coached at USC for a time as well in the early 2000s or late 90s. So I do think Hugh Jackson will coach again, obviously. It's just a matter of when and where.
All right. Is there anything else you want to discuss on this podcast before we get on out of here?
Going back one more thing, when you were talking about, Hugh saying he didn't have the players, and I brought up Chris Palmer in that little snippet for a reason. And Chris Palmer had the same amount of talent, or same level of talent that Hugh Jackson did at 99 and 2000 with the expansion team. He won 5 games. In 2.5 seasons, Hugh only won 3 games. So Hugh can make all the excuses he wants. If you're not a good coach and you can't win, then that's on you. It's on the talent evaluators to a degree, but at the end of the day, if you can't coach these guys up and put them in situations to win, and obviously Chris Palmer did a better job than Hugh Jackson, you get fired at the end of the day. There's no excuses.
I absolutely agree with that. All right. As we get on out of here, go ahead and plug everything you need to plug.
As always, follow me on Twitter at jmccurrycle. Check out my site, thenorthcoastsports.com, and check out the other podcasts that myself and Anthony do, the North Coast Sportscast. We're on Twitter at NC Sportscast, and the podcast is available everywhere you listen to podcasts.
As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Anthony Joki, Joki. You can find our podcast on Facebook and on Twitter at 1085 Gridiron. You can listen to our podcast on pretty much any platform that you can think of, including iTunes, Google Play, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. We absolutely appreciate you guys listening to our podcast, so please subscribe, review, and rate our podcast. And with all that, we're going to get on out of here. We should be back later this week. And always remember, go Browns.